Hello there, everybody. How are you doing? Rosanna here with another update on what's going on in the world in relation to this virus, in relation to testing, in relation to track and trace, in relation to everything that's going on. And how do we have conversations as we are starting to look at the amount of information that's in the media at the moment that really is confusing. And I wanted to make this because I have many friends and clients and family members who maybe don't share my point of view, and that's fine, but it's really important for us to be able to have conversations rather than to ignore each other, judge each other, stay away from each other, because we don't want to get into conflicting information. We don't want to get into arguments. And all of us have opinions, right? The question is, where do those opinions come from? And how can we actually grow together to find a solution that works for all of us, that is what we really want, rather than what we're told we should want? So I am going to start with a little bit of a disclaimer, and I am going to read from a document that I created. Now, what's really important for you all to understand is I am not a scientist. I am not a doctor. I am someone who has spent 20 years working alongside the maternity services around fertility, pregnancy, birth, the postnatal period, and the immediate first 7 years of life that really shape our experience and our perception of the world around us. And what I do want to say, because there is this huge divide going on between, the mainstream narrative and then the alternate narratives, is that both camps are triggered massively by fear. We're all being triggered by fear. And when you are actually in a state of fear, it's very difficult to act rationally, to make the best informed decisions, because you are reacting, you're not responding. And I personally spend at the moment, and I have done for quite a long time, actually, probably the whole of COVID, at least an hour a day researching the things that I talk about. And I'm also very blessed that my beautiful partner is very interested as well in widening his knowledge. He's my husband, and we work together, and we're using this time together rather than distracting ourselves with scaring ourselves with stuff that's on the television, or trying to distract ourselves with things that, aren't really going to serve us to get to the bottom of things. We are spending time together researching and aiming to get to the bottom of what seems like a huge can of worms. So I may dart around a little bit, and I'm really making this primarily for the mothers of the children that I know are confused and scared and don't have the time to research everything themselves. So what I will be doing is everything that I talk about, every article that I reference here, I will be putting in the text box below this video, so that you can actually check them out in your own time. And if you are super busy, then, these are things that you can put on and listen to with your headphones whilst you're cooking, whilst you're washing up, whilst you're doing something else. So if you do want to find out more about the things I'm talking about, then I would invite you to check the links out. Okay, anyone who's here who wants to say hello, please do. Let me get on with this document. And I am intending also to live call a beautiful, beautiful person who is a media student at the moment in her third year of media studies at university, just to get her perspective of everything. She's from Trinidad as well, so she's got a perspective from a black perspective rather than Black and ethnic minority perspective. But she has got a perspective in terms of what's going on in the world that is really important for us to hear, because there is a lot of divide, and it's very difficult for us to be able to appreciate each other's point of view in terms of what we're actually seeing. Personally, I see this massive reset that is going on the planet as a potential for us to reset towards either being more controlled, more surveyed, more surveillance, more of the things that we really don't want in our lives if we want autonomy and sovereignty. And we also have the opportunity to go towards co-creating a reality that allows us to have a complete uplift of the world that we're in and make it better. So this is my invitation. This is where I'm coming from. This is a heartfelt calling to start a conversation. So anyone who feels like they need to just get on here and say things that are derogatory or looking to slate my perspective, you know what? Just look at the resources first, please, and consider whether you've actually looked at things beyond the narrative that you are currently perceiving, because I do look at everything from all the different sides that come to me, and I'm seeking to understand from a deeper perspective what's going on. And my background is what allows me to see things from a perspective that I believe is quite unique. So I hope that you will find this informative. Now, let's carry on with this little disclaimer. So this is my personal opinion. I am sharing my personal opinion and discussing information in the articles and videos that I will share the links to. I personally don't know anyone who has died from or with COVID, and it's very important we understand there is a difference there. My background, as I said to you, is not as a scientist or a doctor, but 20 years in the field of the perinatal field and also yoga. I'm the mother of a 19-year-old, so I started to explore the issue around vaccines when she was a baby, and it was actually my midwife that encouraged me to start to research it before I made the decision to vaccinate. She's a very forward-thinking midwife, independent midwife, and I'm not going to name her, but I, like every other parent, was going to do exactly what I've been told you should do, which is to vaccinate your kids, to protect them from all the nasty things that are out in the world today. And it was very difficult to start to look at this this whole decision that was going to have far-reaching consequences when I had this brand new little baby in my arms that I just wanted to do the best by. And that's why I'm aiming this at mums, because we all want the very best for our children, and we want to trust that those that are telling us what is the best for them is really for the best of them. But we can all make decisions in haste and repent at leisure. And at the moment, we are talking about the fact that there's going to be a widespread rollout of what can only be deemed experimental vaccines, because they haven't had the time frame to be able to prove their efficacy or that they are safe. And, you know, anyone who's looked into vaccine damage, anyone who's looked into why people are named anti-vaxxers, which is a bit unfair because ultimately, you know, there's a reason that people come to a different opinion to the one that is mainstream. And there are, unfortunately, a lot of facts that are suppressed, just like our lovely Prime Minister would like us to suppress this virus. And you cannot suppress what is difficult to face. It will find its way round one way or another. And I believe truly that we're here today because of that. And we really need to look at it and say, right, it is time now to unearth everything that has been pushed down, that is uncomfortable to face. We all need to grow as a humanity beyond being told what to do because we're scared to make to take responsibility and make decisions for ourselves. And we also need to support our education system to push out people who think and feel and question, because this is how we move out of what could be a totalitarian rule, a totalitarian state that seems to be sweeping over the world. And if you think that that is a conspiracy, then please just look at all of the surveillance measures that are being put forward. Look at the conversations that are being had around digital passports. Look at how the fact-checking sites talk about us all being paranoid that we're going to have, you know, some kind of digital imprint under our skin. And yet at the same time, you know, we're now looking at the fact that apps are going to be able to tell us what's going on. And it's only a small shift away from an app on a phone and a scan on your body for this to actually be something that goes from fiction to fact and reality. Okay. So one of the key things that occurred in my professional career as primarily working with the maternity services was that I was a user rep, later co-chair and chair of the Maternity Services Liaison Committee at Croydon University Hospital between 2004 and 2014. And in that time, that hospital had initially one of the worst performing maternity units in the country. And by the time I kind of stepped away, it was one of the best performing maternity units in the country. My business, Enjoy Yoga, was heavily involved in working with the maternity services to improve their service there. And to feed back what was going on so that we could hold them accountable to the things that were not being published. And they could also work with us to find out what was going on behind closed doors that they weren't aware of. In my experience as a doula, attending births in that hospital and other hospitals, I personally witnessed what I would call medical arrogance to some degree, certainly in the sense that anything beyond what has been taught in medical training might be useful, including shifting the position of a woman to help her give birth or knowing more about her pelvis shape to help facilitate an easy exit for the baby. What else happened there? The way that I would describe it is ignorance and arrogance, medical ignorance and arrogance. And again, I don't want to offend anyone who's working within the medical or the scientific faculties, because there are some amazing people doing amazing work within them. And we all know that every profession has the best and the worst. What we want to do is evolve our consciousness and our expectations so that we are getting the best service everywhere. And that includes when we consider the best option long-term for public health and what it means for us as a world society to actually grow and to be thriving rather than surviving. Okay, so at the moment, the way I see our system set up is to help us to survive, but not to thrive. And my invitation is that we evolve our view into what it would mean to thrive. Okay, so where am I going? So I also get first-hand information from people working within the industries I'm referring to. And no, I will not be disclosing my sources to protect their anonymity and bravery. I'll be very, very vague about it because at the end of the day, I'm not going to risk them. They're being very brave and communicating with me. And also, I've been very blessed to have access to research way ahead of its time through the Birthlight yearly conferences at Cambridge University. I am a Birthlight tutor, and I'm very, very grateful to have had the experience to meet with some of the top doctors and scientists and pediatricians, people working within the field of what I call the early years, the early influences, pre and neonatal psychology and science, and understanding more about how when we look after this early period, we can actually safeguard the health and the well-being of that generation and the generations to come. And it is very, very important for us to understand that we have been moving through a medical model in the last 2-3 generations that has actually caused us more problems. We've got an increase in the infertility issues. We've got an increase in birth issues, people expecting things to be complicated, and then outcomes as well. Now, I'm not talking about stats because for me, in this field, what I see is the expectation people have for someone else to tell them what to do rather than to learn the wisdom of their body. And this comes back to, again, this model of health I'm talking about, is how many of us actually want to take more responsibility and learn how to look after ourselves in such a way that I would call holistic, integrative, and formative, so that we're bringing together the very best of nature and science. And we're not trying to synthesize nature every which way we can, which relates again to us as human beings seeking to dominate nature. And there is an element of this that I really studied at university. There were 2 modules that really stuck in my mind, which one was nature as feminine, and the other was a module in globalization. This was 21 years ago. Things I was learning then, I'm seeing playing out in the world today. So none of what I'm saying now is just about this current virus. It's about what we are doing and how we are shaping the future generations to come and what we actually want to do about that and who we're listening to. Okay, so just going beyond that, I want you to be able to trust me and to accept that I am not here to tell you what to do. I'm just here to open your mind and your heart to possibilities that maybe till now you haven't actually been aware of, and also to encourage you to step away from getting all of your information from the mainstream media, because it is limited in what it is putting, even though we're now starting to see leaking into the mainstream media conversations that up until now, 6 months in, weren't even touched upon. So what I can say is that things are moving forward, and whereas there was what I perceive as a blanket ban on conversations beyond the mainstream narrative, they're starting to make it into the media, but it's still very, very confusing to know what to trust. Okay, so beyond that, a little example of this research that actually that I was learning when I was going to these conferences. I know it takes 15 to 20 years for new research to really make it into the guidelines that our medical and scientific profession will actually work with and embed. It always takes time to take on new research. There's always a level of resistance, denial, before something is incorporated. And, I'll give you an example of this. One of them is that when my daughter was a little girl, when she had a fever, you were told to give your child Calpol straight away. You were told by the health services to, try and bring the fever down straight away, using some form of what do they call it? Something that's going to bring the temperature down. But these days, if you actually look at the NICE guidelines, they'll tell you not to use paracetamol or ibuprofen or any of the supposedly temperature reducing drugs out there purely to reduce a fever. It should only be used to bring comfort to the child. And that's because we're learning more about fevers and how fevers are an important aspect of us being able to metabolize and deal with the pathogens in our environment and to build antibodies to them. The question that we all have is, well, surely when we have vaccines, aren't they protecting us? But many of us don't realize that vaccines can only protect you a small percentage, something between 15 and 50% against a particular strain of a virus. So they're not the panacea, like magic bullet that people think they are. And there is a lot to suggest that the side effects and the potential side effects are enough for us to really question whether this is the way we should be going forward as a public health policy, and whether there are alternatives that we can explore that would be better for us all long term. And by that, I really mean looking after the microbiome, looking after our gut health, and understanding the relationship between what we put on and in our bodies, and how our bodies then relate to the environment around them and to whatever bugs and viruses are in the environment. So it's us learning to operate differently in how we look after our young. Okay, so where am I? As I said, I'm making this for my friends and family, just so we can start the conversation and have more open conversations about it. It's really helpful to just not feel like you have to stay away. And I've already explained to you how long I'm spending researching things. I also want you to think about this. Do you think our politicians are spending time researching things, or do you think that they're being given information that they then need to pass on? They're so busy, you know, trying to formulate policies and reacting and responding to the imminent threats and dangers that are there that they've got to. How much time are they actually getting to research anything? And are they researching anything that is beyond what they've been told? I know that recently there was an article about the fact that the Prime Minister is basically not taking into account the fact that 7,000 doctors and scientists from all around the world have stepped forward to say, we really need to look at the measures that we are putting in place to fight this virus and whether they are really justified. And, you know, we'll always be asking the question, well, why would they do something that isn't for the highest good of all? And you may have heard the term follow the money. But one thing I'd invite you to really look at is the fact that every one of the politicians that I've researched has links to banking systems, has links to economics, has links to big multinational companies, has links to the desire to create some form of state, if you like, or global state that is easier to manage, and one could say control. And again, I'm kind of very fascinated by the fact that the majority of the people that we're seeing that are actually leading how we should be going forward with dealing with this virus are white men. And my argument for this, and the reason that my background is important to this, is that we are all facing a massive fear detox at the moment, okay? And the men and women that are currently, you know, making decisions, political decisions, scientific decisions, medical decisions, are all descendants, third, fourth, fifth generational descendants of those who lived through the First and the Second World War. The thing that's important to remember here is that cellular memory, trauma, gets passed from one generation to the next. And in my area of expertise, what I've seen and what I work with, the adults that I work with in my coaching work, is that any trauma that has not been processed, it's been suppressed, and this is the link to the virus, will seek to find a way for it to be brought to light, to be lived out, to be expressed in consciousness, so it can be released. So if the descendants of those who were pregnant in the First and the Second World War are now currently the ones making the decisions for us, it's important to remember that their nervous system response that they would have actually set in motion in the womb, because that's what happens, our nervous system, the way our brain starts to develop, the nervous system response, our capacity to digest and process, is very much linked to how our mothers perceived their environment when they were pregnant with us and in the first year of life after. And if you have experienced any kind of loss in pregnancy, you will know that it has an impact on your child. You will know if you went through something traumatic when you were pregnant, that you can see there is some kind of impact if you look into it, okay? And what this means is, if a woman does not feel well supported and she doesn't feel secure and held, and she's in a safe environment when she's growing her baby is basically being primed to survive the world that he or she is going to be born into, not to thrive in the world that he or she is going to be born into. And it affects the way the brain develops. It affects the fact that the hindbrain will develop more than the forebrain. It affects the fact that the heightened reactive response, the fight-flight response, is going to be more prevalent in that being, rather than the ability to just process information, to activate the neocortex, and to problem solve from a higher perspective rather than a state of threat. And again, what's important to recognize in this and to understand the impact is that if the descendants are of those that were in a state of high stress most of the time, because maybe there were bombs going off over them, maybe their husbands were at war and they were killed, or they didn't know when they were coming back. Maybe the child isn't even their own child, it's not the father's child, it's a love child because, you know, we were separated in the times of war. Maybe mum was working super hard, or she had no time to look after her children because she had to go to work, because she had to help the cause. Or perhaps even just the effect of rationing and not getting enough good nutrition and rest. These are all impacting us and our development. And if they impacted us 4 generations ago or 3 generations ago, they're going to impact us still now. And what I'm seeing happening in the world today is an invitation for all of that trauma to be healed. Equally, though, what I would say is that the people that are in power presently are not particularly balanced themselves. They're not particularly emotionally intelligent, and I don't mean to offend anyone, but what I'm talking about here is if they have a load of unmet needs, then they're going to have a strong desire to control and to suppress and to dominate in order to feel safe. And this is where we are today. That's the sort of emotional psychological impact of it. So I'm going to move away from that, but hopefully have a bit more of a conversation about it at a later time. So what I wanted to do was basically just to set the scene for what I witnessed, what I saw, which was a video by, what's the guy's name now? Reiner Fuellmich, which was the video that was made called Crimes Against Humanity. And I highly recommend you watch it. I've tried to find dirt on him. I've tried to find fact checkers sort of saying things against this video, but ultimately the guy's a lawyer. He's been involved in fraud cases all of his professional career. He's got quite an interesting CV, and I would encourage you to check it out and to watch it, and to watch it with your partner, to watch it together, just so that you can see where it takes you and how it explains the link between things. So that was the instigator of this actual video. And I do please encourage you to look at all of the links before you comment. If you feel like you need to comment, feel free to get in touch if you would like to. What I want to do is invite hope and inspiration by focusing firstly on the problem and then looking at the solution. So here we go. The first one. This is an important video for anyone who really cannot get their heads around why governments and international organisations would inflate the potential risk of the virus and what they may gain from this. It's also for anyone who can't understand why wearing a mask is not the answer to keep those healthy and those vulnerable protected. It's also for those who don't really understand the argument against the mass track and trace and PCR testing. The fact that this is not required, as we do not have the threat on our hands. We have been told we have, and I'll do my best to clarify what I mean by that. And anyone who would object to having vaccine that is needed for everyone to be protected, like the face mask wearing. So I am sharing my opinion and I'm asking questions, and I invite you to ask your questions too. I already shared a post which I was trying to find about PCR testing and the questions around PCR testing. But essentially, what I would say about that is I'm going to put 2 links in the text box about it. The main thing is it is very inaccurate. It is much more likely to produce false positives. And at a time in the world today where we've gone from the initial shock of this virus and the way that the media was portraying it being about deaths, it's gone from deaths to cases. But again, I was listening to someone talking about cases the other day. And now, if you hear of a case of COVID, you would imagine that that means it's inferred that someone has been hospitalized, is having to have treatment for it because they're really unwell. But from what I've understood from reading everything, a case is being counted as anyone who has been tested positive as having COVID. Now, the problem with that is the arguments that are against the PCR testing, and I actually have a video that I will include that has the originator of the PCR test talking about it. He sadly passed away from pneumonia, apparently, just before this whole crisis hit. But essentially, he would be the first to say that this is not an accurate way of determining whether someone has a virus. What it does is it can tell you if they've been exposed to it and if they've got any trace within them of dead cell matter that would relate to that virus. So people are coming out as being positive, COVID positive, without them having any symptoms and without them even being infectious, because the amount of times that the test is basically amplified in order to be able to see a trace of this virus differs from country to country, first and foremost. And it is so many times that basically the more you amplify something, eventually you'll be able to find anything you're looking for. So this is why there is skepticism and concern around this test, because if we have gone from what seemed like symptoms of COVID and people being told they have it because they've got the symptoms of it, and then we're counting deaths based on that, it's important to remember that deaths from and deaths with are not the same thing. So you could die from a heart attack or a gunshot wound, but you also have tested positive for COVID. So what's going on the death certificate? Well, there's been a lot of concern around the fact that many countries, many medical faculties are being paid, hospitals are being paid to put down COVID as the cause of death. Now, I'm not saying that's true. I'm just saying that's something that has been talked about, and there are many doctors speaking up about that. So I'll leave that to them. But what I would say about this is the fact that the data is not clear. The data that we're going from, the kind of information that the television is telling us, is basically misleading. Because, as we said, a death from, a death with is different. A case of, as in severe symptoms needing hospitalization or treatment, versus someone who has it and doesn't even know they have it, they're quite different, right? They're not all the same. And yet, if we're now seeing in the media that cases are rising, which it makes sense they're going to rise if suddenly everyone's being tested, right? And if those tests are producing a lot of false positives. And I'll give you the example that at the moment, the way that the figures actually are said to work is that 1 in 1,000 people will test positive with COVID, okay? But if you then, 1 in 1,000 people will have COVID. So if you then test for it using the PCR test, the amplification and the amount of people involved means that for the 1 in 1,000 that actually truly does have it, you will end up with another 10 in 1,000 that have tested positive for it but don't have it. They might have a dead strain, dead cells, or they had some exposure to it, but it's never amounted in them being contagious. And the contagion element is down again to how many cycles of amplification. Now, around 24 cycles, you say, okay, potentially contagious, but around 30, 35, 40, 50 even, you say, no, not a risk. So the track and trace element of everything is concerning because we're all basically being put under pressure to be able to be tracked and traced. In Australia, there's a complete stage 4 lockdown for what seems like a huge overreaction on the basis that maybe you can get the numbers down, but then what happens when everyone goes about their business again? If something's in the air, it's in the air. It's only going to come back out again when it's got a host to populate it, right? So ultimately, we are having our civil liberties being squished and squashed. We are having all sorts of measures being put in place that ultimately are questionable. A lot of people are questioning them, and there is good reason for it. But the mainstream narrative, so our governments and the medical professionals that the government's listening to and the scientists are basically saying, we have to do this, this is the way we must go. And we're ending up with a situation where we're potentially going to have to be tracked and traced for everything we want to do outside of our home, whether that's traveling, whether that's going to the cinema, whether that's going to a restaurant. It's already started. And you can check out Operation Moonshot, which is the British Medical Journal talking about how they're actually going to roll out all of this track and testing and how they're going to coerce people into basically saying yes to it or having their freedoms basically being limited. So you don't have to be tracked and traced, but you won't be able to go here, here, or here. And the argument, again, is down to the fact that this test is not an effective and accurate test for what it is being used for. And that is to basically prove that someone has COVID. It's negative or positive rather than degrees of. And we really need to look at this differently because people are being tested and they're coming out as having it, yet they're asymptomatic and they're not even contagious. But they are being forced to self-isolate, they're being restricted. This is affecting their well-being, it's affecting the economy, it is affecting everything in their lives and making it harder and harder for any of us to go about our daily business and not end up in a dire state, whether that's psychologically, emotionally, physically, or spiritually. So let's get going with this a little bit more. So one of the things that I saw was in the Financial Times. There was an article, which I will source for you, where the chief, the lady that was head of the vaccine program that is going to be rolled out in the UK was basically saying in the Financial Times that less than half of the UK population is to receive the COVID vaccine, only those that are at risk. Now, this article was published to deal with the misguided public expectation that all the population needs to be vaccinated. I'm going to just ask you this question. What have you been believing recently? As you've been hearing everything and the fact that all these measures are going to continue until we have basically got a vaccine that everyone can have access to, have you been led to believe, have you interpreted the information around you that there is going to be a vaccine, that vaccine is going to be for everybody? Are you surprised to hear that less than half of the UK population is going to be given it? And how is that conflicting in terms of when you hear Gates and you hear Fauci and you hear people talking about the fact that we're looking for a vaccine and no one's really going to be able to come out until we've got a vaccine for everyone? Because I think there's a lot of misinformation there. It's misleading, let's say. We've all been told to look out for this vaccine. That's the magic bullet that is actually going to help us to be able to go back to normality. Right, but it's not going to be normality as we knew it. It's going to be track and trace normality. And that's not normality. That is surveillance on a mass scale. That actually, I don't know what your values are, but I like my privacy. And some people say, well, I've got nothing to hide, doesn't matter. That's fine. I still like my privacy. I don't want people to be able to access, without me knowing, my information and to be able to have some kind of public authority over that, because there is this scary monster out there that means we must all hand over our power to some bigger power to control us so that we can all stay safe. Like that's the argument that is concerning for me. And the fact that this chief, vaccine officer, I can't remember her name, but I will put the article in it, is basically saying that less than half the population is going to be vaccinated. That to me is confusing information. So why do we need all of these measures in place if we're not even going to vaccinate the whole population? The article, it says here, however, the article talks about the rise in cases as though this is somehow worrying or unexpected. But if you suddenly start testing everyone who is with a notoriously unreliable test, and I say notoriously based on what other people have said about this, because it produces so many false positives, then that should not be used to diagnose COVID. What do we expect? This is a test that the very creator of has said should not be used to diagnose things with, and yet it is being used to diagnose. So there is a question mark there, and there's a big reason why it seems like there's a big shutdown of the medics and the scientists who are speaking out against this. So I found a couple of articles that basically talk about the effectiveness of COVID and the PCR test and how sensitive it actually is. And I'm going to put those in the text box below as well. One of them is literally from www.advisory.com daily briefing. So this is, quite a conservative scepticism, because it's saying we shouldn't stop using it. It's just the way we're using it that we should change. Fair enough. And then I've got a video as well that I'm going to share for you, which talks a lot more about the issue around PCR testing and why actually it's not the answer. And we shouldn't really be looking at a track and trace system as we are based on this. Now, the main point, March and April, we were dealing with deaths, not cases, from or with COVID. There was no data to separate. Cases should relate to someone, as I said, who has a disease or a virus and is receiving treatment for it. However, anyone being tested as positive is noted down as a case. This is what I have read, though the chances are you do not even know that you've got it. Rates are so low of having the virus in the system that either it's too low to infect or it's not even there. It might have been something that you had in the past. So why do we need to get everyone tested? Who's making the money out of this, right? And what are the benefits? What are the benefits to us? What are the benefits to those around? What is this all really about? You may have heard that there's this question about, is this about health? Is it about control? And this is why I'm making this video, because to me, it seems like it's more about control than health. I'd like to be wrong, but that's how I'm seeing it at the moment. Apparently, testing and the vaccine will be voluntary. However, as we said, and I mentioned Operation Moonshot, that voluntary element is questionable, because if you don't volunteer to be tested and tracked, then you will find that you're not able to go and enter locations you would like to take part in the kind of activities that you used to do without even thinking about it, because it's put forward that you will be a risk to others. Yet you're asymptomatic, you have no symptoms, you're feeling well, then you should be no risk to anyone else. And again, other testing methods will come out. We're talking specifically about using this test to be able to decipher whether or not someone actually has it and they are a risk to other people. This is the issue, okay? Because none of us want to make those that are vulnerable get sick, right? Please don't think that this is something that I would want to do to someone. It's not, okay? But I am questioning everything to the point that I am, because I'm not seeing anything make a lot of sense. And the kind of messages that we're getting from our leaders, they don't fit. It doesn't feel like they fit. To me, it doesn't feel like they fit. And I'm using my instinct, but I'm also using my capacity to critically examine data and try and connect all of the dots. And this is the invitation to you. So if you actually look at the World Health Organization website, you will see the figures of cases and the figures of deaths. And if you go and you try and look at the analysis of data, there's really not a lot of information there. They don't separate from and with. They don't separate has tested positive versus has severe symptoms or intermediate or mild symptoms. So again, this information is very misleading. Now, books have come out. There's a book called Corona False Alarm that's come out, being slated left, right and centre. The doctor that I was listening to at the march that I went on, the protest that I went on, as I said, the police stormed twice when this guy stood up to speak. Once at Trafalgar Square and once at Speaker's Corner. Now, I noticed that. It was very interesting that that was the time that the police came in. And we've got the book here now and we're reading it. And it's really basically tearing apart the current narrative. And that's possibly why people don't want you to read it, right? They don't want us to read it. They don't want anyone to read it. So again, I prefer to read things myself and make my own decisions. If you don't have the time to do that, then remember that it's not cut and dry. And if you're trying to get your information from the mainstream media, you're going to be confused. Right, more than that is the fact that Operation Moonshot is very easy for you to research, and I'll again send the links on that. But there was also something that I mentioned in the last video I did, which was about critical thinking, conspiracies and conspiritualism. And it was about the fact that we know that SAGE, which is supposedly an independent body that advises the government, basically worked with the government to create a fear campaign to get everybody to comply to what would need to be done in order to keep us all safe. And again, I'll put the link for that so you can research it and see just how the government has utilized the media to be able to perpetuate this fear message. Now, again, if I use my background as an example, I know full well that if you've got a deadly virus out there, the last thing you should be doing is scaring everybody to death about this virus, because what happens is we go into a state of fight or flight again. We go into fear. What does that mean? Your blood, instead of nourishing all of your organs, instead of resting, repairing your cells, helping you to feel well and fully functioning, goes to your extremities and your most vital organs to prepare you for flight or fight. You're not going to be thinking rationally. You're going to be reacting to a true and impending danger. That's the point of this aspect of our physiology. However, when we're constantly bombarded with this information all the time, fear, 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 we're in a chronic state of stress. Now, that chronic state of stress is really detrimental to your body. Combine that with wearing a mask, which is basically altering the balance of oxygen and CO2 because you are breathing back in your air without it going out, without you getting more oxygen coming in. If you have any kind of respiratory issues, if you have any kind of inflammatory issues in your body, then this is going to mean that long-term use of these masks is not going to be beneficial to your well-being. Combine that with feeling really unsafe. Combine that with feeling like there's an invisible enemy that you've got to suppress, to use the words of our PM. I'm amazed to get out of bed. I'd be terrified. And the point is, it's not good for you. So if we actually want to support our immune system to work well, we need to eat right. We need to take care of our gut flora. And that is so important. And why it's not being talked about is really confusing to me, because we know that 80% of the immune system is said to be in our gut, okay, in the balance of our good and our bad bacteria. And if you've even had one course of antibiotics and you haven't actually repopulated your gut with good bacteria, to believe that your gut is going to balance itself out on its own is something that you really need to wake up from, because our foods are radiated. Most of us eat way too much sugar. We drink alcohol. We eat processed foods. We eat refined foods. All of these things basically add the environmental toxins of perfumes and everything else that you put on your body. You're basically encouraging the bad bacteria in your gut to thrive. And what that means is you're going to be more susceptible to bacteria and viruses that come your way. This also leads me to talk about the fact that at the moment there's this huge push to get everybody to have the flu vaccine. Sure, we're coming into flu season, okay, and there are quite a lot of information which is very interesting about why the initial death rate was so high when COVID struck, because it is a very virulent form of flu. Okay, we're not saying it's a walk in the park. It's a very virulent form of flu, but one of the reasons that it's said in one of the links I'm going to send you, very long, boring one apparently, is that there had not been the flu season, the past had been really mild. So we were heading for a big flu, and those who would be susceptible to the flu were the ones that got hit hard when this COVID came about, but they would have been hit hard by any other flu because we hadn't actually had the kind of flu that for a long time that is a strong flu that tends to get people. So there was an expectation that there would be something coming. I don't feel I've expressed that particularly well, but I'll let the video do the talking for you. Ultimately, whenever you have any kind of vaccine, what you do is you're getting your immune system to look for a particular strain of a virus, right? So whilst it's on lookout for something in particular, it's not going to be so aware of other threats that it hasn't been told to look out for. So my question is, and again, I could be completely wrong with this, I'm just opening up. If you are going to have a flu vaccine to protect you against flu that isn't actually COVID, is it not potential that you could actually be more susceptible to COVID as a result of getting your immune system just to look for these strains of flu whilst COVID's still out on the loose? And, you know, as someone who hasn't had a vaccine since I was 18 years old, I've had probably one set of antibiotics in all of my adult life. I'm generally really quite well and quite healthy. And I do look after myself. And I can't be the example that everyone else can follow. But what I would say is there is a link that isn't being talked about enough about autoimmune response to vaccines and to the inflammation in our bodies, and how if we have got more inflammation in our bodies due to poor lifestyle choices and diet and stress, which is the biggest factor that we really need to address, stress and fear are interlinked, then we are more susceptible to, one, having a weaker immune system, two, having severe reactions to viruses that are about and to vaccines. And is it not going to be a better option for us to actually take a step back and look rather at having this rollout that supposedly is going to help us all, is to actually look at how we can overall protect our whole immune system and not just specific strains. Okay, carrying on. So I've said here, I really want to be reassured that I've really just been paranoid all along, and it really is only those at risk who will need to be vaccinated or tested. But the article that I mentioned of the lady talking about the most vulnerable mentioned the over 50s. So those people working in nursing homes, those who are over 70, and then rolling out to the over 50s. Care workers who are less affluent. But they were also talking about, and she didn't mention it in the article, Black and ethnic minorities. And I'm like, okay, what? Everyone who's Black or is an ethnic minority needs to be vaccinated? Every one of them? Why? What's that about? And I refer now to another article, which was an article in the BBC I saw the other day. So the first one I talked about was in the Financial Times. This one's in the BBC with leaked plans for a vaccine rollout in the West Midlands. And this particular one is talking about the way it was worded was that the entire population was going to be vaccinated. So we've got one woman, the chief officer of the Vaccine Commission, saying that, no, it's only going to be less than 50% of the population. And then you've got the BBC reporting on West Midlands, the fact that the entire population is going to be vaccinated. Oh, yes, it is the elderly folk, and it's also going to be all of the Black and ethnic minorities in the area. Now, I'm not Black and I'm not an ethnic minority, but to me, that's like concerning. That's really concerning. What if I don't want it? What if I've got concerns about it? What if I've got mental health issues and I can't even speak up for myself, but actually this is going to be pushed upon me because it's in my best interest? It's very concerning because one size fits all is a model that our medical system has liked to utilize. And it's not selective care, it's blanket care. And okay, there'll be a few people that will fall by the side, but the general consensus is that the benefits far outweigh the risks. And yet there is compelling evidence to suggest that is not the case. Now let's just see if I can get hold of Mia at this point, because I said I might give her a call. Let's just see. No, let's not call that one. Let's just see if this lovely soul will speak up. So I'm hopefully going to have her on for about 5 minutes just to explain her perspective of working as a media studies student. Hello, my dear. You're live.
Hi. I'm live. Oh, I'm just realising I'm a little bit behind in the video and when it's on live.
It's all good. Do you wanna speak up? Because what I wanted to do is just to say, you know, obviously you know how the media works, and you know, here I am, just this woman spouting her opinion on my channel. And also being from Trinidad, and I've just literally talked about obviously what's going on in the West Midlands and the way things are being reported. What would you like to say?
I think this is a really interesting time, especially as a student right now. It's a really interesting time to be studying media, and also with a lot of the things that are coming to light at this point in time. Especially to do with the vaccine of, but they're hoping to, they're planning to force mass vaccinations on a lot of Black and brown bodies. I say Black and brown for clarification, not just to mean Black, meaning African and Caribbean descent, but, you know, taking into account the array of the beautiful shades of brown, you know, that exist across the world. And it's an interesting time simply because you see this state where, you know, this isn't new information in a sense. This isn't a new practice where Western medicine has decided to test their black and brown people like lab rats. Western medicine has a very violent and, quite frankly, upsetting history with regard to developing and post-colonial countries where vaccines for various deadly viruses like polio were tested on men, women, and children. Most often we're doing in the same way that we are now, in the sense of, you know, phase stages of clinical trials. And most often these people were not told, one, that they were in the first stages of testing, but also a promise that it would, you know, this is the best thing for them, as it would ensure that their survival. I say this not to impose my own view. I am someone that personally, I'm not completely against vaccination, but I am against forced vaccinations, and I don't believe it to be the only method or the only way in which we can understand or fight off infection but this is to say that, you know, this is the same with this history that we have is the same with contraception, specifically with the pill. I'm sure you're aware with your history and fertility work. In that, you know, in the case of the pill, many South American women were given the same with the pill with the false promise that it would, you know, it had been tested, and as a result, without, you know, disclosure of full information, many developed ovarian cancer and thus becoming infertile. Essentially. Hello? Can you hear me?
Yeah, just stop for a sec, just so I can reiterate, because it's a little bit muffled. So what we're hearing here is that Black and brown people have been used for a long time to test Western medicine. And you're giving the example of the pill. And this is obviously family planning, and also the polio vaccine and other vaccines that have been rolled out in countries where people have been misinformed. They've been told it's for their health, for their well-being. They have not been able to give informed consent. They have not been told all of the risks. They've not been told everything that could happen. And they've also not been able to claim compensation. Is that right as well?
Correct. And most often the cases, you know, that they aren't aware. It's only within, you know, in hindsight that we see that this information comes out, that it was as a result of, you know, trials. For me, I found the information, the pill was very recent information for me, from Dr. Julie in Brighton. I can add her information in the chat box. And for me, it was a very revealing statistic, and it's something that still, she was saying in her own way, something that is massively overlooked, but is a massive part of the history of contraception and research into contraception.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of information, and it's kind of leading into a lot of where we are now. I think there's a massive moment of miscommunication, via the media, which I'll talk about in a moment. But in the sense that all that's coming up at this point in time isn't new. It's pretty much just repeating old information that has been massively suppressed for time. With a lot of the colonial powers trying not for this information to be revealed simply because it undermines what we believe, or undermines the basis or the history of what we understand Great Britain to be, or undermines the history of what we believe, the Western powers to be, in the sense of America, Canada, New Zealand. And I say this all to say, this is our history. I say the collective human history, and we are in this state right now simply because we refuse to look back and actually understand the complexities of our history. We're trying to, brush it over with, we're trying to look at it with rose-tinted glasses without actually looking at the fact that this is the truth of what has happened. And it kind of echoes this quite a popular saying of, those who can't remember the past are condemned to repeat it. And we see it happening now, in the sense that this has been the medical history, this has been the history of Western medicine. And now here we are, this is in the news again, of the vaccine being tested on Black and brown beings. And it's no coincidence that it's the same, that those who are Muslims are those of perhaps descendants of those very white slave traders who would have exploited black and brown people for decades, for eons, and based off of this perception of Black and brown people being inferior, which is obviously,
a load of bollocks.
A load of bollocks.
Yeah. So just hold that for a sec, because this is now getting into territory that is hot, okay? Because if you actually look at the information technology multi-billionaire who's got very, very interested in going into developing countries and saving everybody, is the same multi-billionaire who talks about the fact that we really do need to depopulate the planet a little bit because it's linked to global warming. There's too many people and our carbon emissions, etc., etc. And if you actually look at the guy's history and what his dad is famous for, it is the family planning movement that was set up in the US. So there is a link here. And it's important for people to see it, because the conspiracy theorists apparently talk about eugenics. And what is eugenics? But now, when you look at the people that are actually the leaders that are making the decisions now, suppressing viruses, they're also the ones that have probably got a lot of uncomfortable truths in their cupboards and their history and their ancestors, because they are the descendants of the colonials who were directly involved in the slave trade, and this idea that Black and brown people are in some way inferior. And here we are again, rolling out something that supposedly is good for everybody, but is going to be tested on Black and brown bodies, as you say, okay? Yeah. So carry on.
And it's no coincidence the timing of all of this as well. This coronavirus being, you see the statistics when we start, in the sense that we see that many, I can't recall the exact stat at the moment, but essentially the massive inequalities that the people or the ethnic group that is most at risk was those of Black and Asian minority ethnic group.
Yeah.
This isn't to say that this is they're biologically inferior. It recognizes the fact that there is class inequalities at play, which means that these communities, or the communities that are populated largely by ethnic minorities, are those in which you have unequal access to healthcare, who, they are most vulnerable, not simply because of the choices, their personal choices, but the institution in which they're existing, and the institution in which they are operating. That's kind of, recognizing that all of this is what happens when we don't we don't look at all of the truths that are happening at the same time. If we say, you know, my truth is the only truth, and you know that because you can have there are people in the world who will create this narrative that the reason that, you know, really that use eugenics to make the claims of why black and Asian minority ethnic groups are more at risk. They will use eugenics, they will use all kinds of, you know, twisted narratives, but that is the truth that they have created. However, what happens when we have a world in which we acknowledge there are multiple truths and make decisions based off of that? What we're happening and what we're seeing at this point is this massive, I'm a student of English as well as media as well as English language. And right now I'm really interested in the word apocalypse, which is, you know, a lot of people are, you know, making the jokes of in terms of, when you see the memes of this is what apocalypse, this is, you know, sometimes it's the apocalypse. And I say this because the word technically apocalypse in its origins, etymology, literally in its Greek origins means to uncover, to reveal.
You're talking
right?
to a Greek girl, darling. I know, this is it. It's the great reveal. It's not about the end of days, right?
Yeah. We're in a massive revelation of information, and we have a really poignant place in human history, but we have the decision, we have all this information rising, it's our choice to then see, how am I going to deal with it? Am I gonna focus my mind only on one stream of information that's telling me something? Or am I gonna open myself up to multiple streams of information and see how best I can make a decision? I mean, I'm not here necessarily to tell anybody what to do or to tell anyone, it's not my job to do, it's not my job to tell anyone what decisions to make. But I've realized in doing media, there are lots of streams of information that's coming through, and people, I think, sometimes underestimate the power of media to, or you know, dominant media to convey a certain message. And it's one, like, you know, as I was saying, I'm very interested in, you know, choice of language and the language that we use, right? Because technically, the whole understanding of news isn't necessarily what has happened, but how it is said, and you know, like, something as small as, you know, the conversations around the Black Lives Matter protesters, the difference in referring to them as rioters as opposed to peaceful protesters, right? Mm-hmm. The people who would use those different phrases are living very different truths. But what happens when we recognize, okay, we understand the truth of seeing this as a rioter, right? And we recognize the truth of seeing these people as peaceful protesters. What happens when we take those bits of information and say, okay, you're a peaceful protester, but I see your anger in the sense you're rioting. Why are you angry? Why are you rioting? Why do you feel the need to react this way, right? And in that way, we're able to draw parallels between, understand that there's multiple different truths that we're living in, there are multiple streams of information, there are multiple messages that are being pushed. But what happens when we look at all of these streams of information and make an informed decision as to what's happening?
Absolutely. No, thanks. Hold that for a sec, darling. Just hold it for a sec. So just remind me how old you are for everybody.
I'm 20.
So this lady's 20, right? She's 20. She's in the third year of media studies and English language, is it?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. And she's saying to you there are multiple truths. She's also saying to you that history is destined to repeat itself unless we learn from history. From the past, and we don't forget what has happened. And unfortunately, and I think you're going to move on to this now, the media is very good at whitewashing and rewriting stories to suit the narratives of the time. And this is what's so important, is the people that are in power now not only are the descendants of those that basically were traumatized by First, Second World War and civil wars and all the things that have gone on in the world today that has never been healed. So they're coming from a place that I would say isn't particularly well balanced from a holistic point of view. Their nervous system's not well balanced. But they're also the descendants of the white supremacy, for want of a better word. And again, you know, what we mean by that is basically the whites who have dominated everyone else around the planet. And whether that's colonialism, you know, whatever you want to call it at this point, this is still going on. And this is what needs to be addressed. Tell us a bit Tell us about the media, like from your point of view, having studied 3 years at media, knowing that the news puts things a certain way, knowing that there's lots of different messages in different newspapers aimed at different demographics, okay, socioeconomic demographics, and even in the highbrow ones, so whether we're talking about The Independent, The Times, The Guardian, you know, I get confused. One day it's pro this, the next day it's anti that. It's like, what's the deal with all of that?
As do I, Rosie.
Tell us more.
It's one of those, you know, sorry, I cut you off. Carry on.
No. Tell us about that. What is that all about? Why does this go on this way?
Well, I think it's massively, like, you know, recognizing that everyone has their own biases, whether we want to or not, and that is reflected in the way that we speak, the way that, you know, we understand the world, and but I see this to me, you know, in studying media, especially at this point in time, I had a very massive kind of revelation, no coincidence there, that, you know, I can't control the story that people tell. I can't control but what I can control is the stories that I choose to hear. So with this in mind, you know, I just say again, I'm not telling any my purpose here isn't necessarily, you know, my saying this isn't to tell anyone, you know, what is the best thing. But in my experience, you know, I found it really helpful to kind of find new avenues of information, you know, diversifying the sources of information that I get from, and to kind of, you know, weighing up how is this told as opposed to how this is told. Because I think that if we just kind of feed into this, you know, we recognize one dominant source, you know, recognize one source of information constantly, we're going to relive this cycle without actually making any attempts to break it. And I think that the way that we break the cycle is to open ourselves up to different truths, different perspectives.
Yeah.
I also say that in the sense that I personally, and I, you know, saying this also in terms of a lot of people and friends that I've spoken to at this time, it's a really painful time, an emotionally draining time with all these streams of information, and I know it's really overwhelming. I myself get overwhelmed and tend to take days off and I can't look at the news. And the way that I found it most helpful, because it's not easy to, you know, it's one thing to say that you listen to one news story, but then to have multiple, it sounds overwhelming. I understand that completely. But the way that I'm overcoming that, and a way that I find it really helpful, is to kind of allocate or give myself, you know, say 20 minutes in the morning or any time of the day that I have a chance. So I allocate saying, I'm going to sit here and spend 20 minutes reading different I'm going to read the news. Where I'm going to tell myself I'm going to read 3 different articles and sit there, you know, have a thought with it, dedicate that 20 minutes just for that time of consuming news. And then after that, don't even you know, pick up my phone to then consume news through my phone. I'm not going to pick up, you know, my phone, just look at news, another news app for another day, another 2 days, depending on, you know, how overwhelming it is for you. Because it is, I think we're forgetting sometimes how difficult a time this is, and that there's no guidebook on how to live through a pandemic. There's no guide, you know, there's no rules, and especially it's a really confusing time for a lot of people. And I think the best way to allow yourself to do it is to be upfront with yourself when you are consuming the news. How does this make me feel? How am I feeling when I'm consuming this information? And if it is too much, take that step back and to kind of take a moment to analyze why you feel that it's contributing to that feeling of anxiety or that fear or that, you know. I think we need to be aware of ourselves and aware of of those around us at this time, because everyone's got their own story that they're trying to tell, but the way that you interpret your own story is completely, the way you interpret and write your own story is completely up to you. No,
that's it. I hear you. I'm gonna let you go now. But what I'd say is, obviously, people are always very concerned about reading anything that's not in the mainstream media, because it's not, you know, like they'll go, oh, it's a conspiracy theory, or that's not a trusted site, or, you know, that's a Russian troll farm, that's just seeking to put propaganda out. What would you say about that? I mean, would you say it's important to look beyond the mainstream and actually to educate yourself about these other conversations? Obviously, check sources, because some are very obviously, fake news, but others are not. And you're not going to get a balanced argument if you're just looking in the mainstream.
No. I mean, I think this is why spaces, thank you, Rosie, for creating a space and, to have these conversations. I think these are really important spaces to engage with, forms of information that's not just by the dominant, dominant BBC or, say, Guardian or, I think it's one of those, it's quite difficult because it means that news can be produced. Everyone can write a news story and, Photoshop a picture together. That's true. Yeah, I see and understand that. But there are some really amazing people that are working to combat that. You have, I really recommend, if you're on social media, I'm part of I follow a group called The Do, which their whole, purpose is to be able to engage with people to present different news sources from completely different sources, and where you're allowed to have that conversation in the comments, and that's just one of the examples. There's so many news sources that are and news presenters that are trying to do that, and I think that they are succeeding. And I think with that, you do need to fact check, and it's something that you do need to spend a little bit of time Googling.
But I'm going to hold you there, and I'm going to say the fact-checking sites are all pretty dubious actually, from what I've heard. And so it's being able to check things and to use your own discernment to actually hear the other side of what is whitewashed by the media. Like, it's hearing the light and the shadow and trusting your instincts around that. Can you do me a favour, because we're just running a little bit over time, and I want to bring this to a conclusion with the other things that I wanted to say. Can you please put those links that you mentioned in the comments so that people can actually access them? And if you've got any resources you want me to share, then let me know and I'll add them in the text box as well. All right?
Thank you. Definitely.
Cool. All right, darling.
Thanks for allowing me the space to speak, Rosie, and it's such an important and necessary conversation.
It is, and I'm so grateful to you for having it with me. I really appreciate it. So I hope this was useful for everyone else as well. Have a good lecture. I'll speak to you a bit later.
Thank you. Bye.
Take care. Bye. Bye. Blows me away when I hear youngsters like that. Just so switched on. Amazing. Okay, so let's wrap this up, because I know the mums have had to go and pick up their kids already. So, the bottom line is, 1 minute we're being told, calm down. The next minute we're told, be frightened. Oh, no, we're not going to survey you. Oh, but we are going to survey you. And, I watched Tobias Ellwood. I've got a little clip that I'm going to share with you on what was, Parliament Live or whatever, basically talking about the fact that this is a mass thing, this rollout of this vaccination program and the track and trace, and they're going to have to involve the army, and it all sounds rather scary. And yes, the army is out in London at the moment. And, why is this such a big deal when actually the percentage of people that are dying from, not with, and the percentage of people that are actually getting the virus and then being really, really maimed by it is actually relatively low. It is significantly lower than is being made out. Please don't think that I'm not saying it's dangerous and that it affects some people really, really negatively. But what I've done is I've tried to point you to the idea that there is a link between how healthy we are, whether we have an underlying condition that's obvious or not, or we simply have an inflamed body and we have inflammation in our system and we have a dodgy microbiome. All of these things are going to contribute to how severely we react or respond to this virus. And my invitation is that we want to look at our health system in a completely different way and start to integrate and bring in the best of everything, but not rely on a system that is drug-based, that has all sorts of side effects as the answer, the panacea to world health. Because certainly for me, it's not my experience that that is the way forward. Let's move on. So basically, arguments for and against. I feel like, 1 minute we're being told it's not, things are not as bad as they seem. The next minute we're being told that they are really bad, that there is a lot of information out there where on the one hand, you're trying to pacify everybody and re-inform them about who's going to be vaccinated. And on the other hand, you're then getting no, this is going to affect everybody. And certainly the way the US reports it, the way that the airports, the airlines, the way that the systems are kind of being set up at the moment is that, you know, for us to go back to normal, we've got to be able to test everybody. We've got to be able to vaccinate everybody. We've got to be able to keep a digital profile of them so that we can all go about our business. And the criticism to this, not just from the book Corona False Alarm, not just from the doctor that made the video, the lawyer that made the video against crimes against humanity, not just from Dr. Heyho Schoening, who was the guy who was speaking up, who was arrested, and the 7,000 odd doctors and scientists around the world that are saying we are not responding appropriately to this, we are overreacting, and what we're doing is we're giving this the chance to be the, what propels a new world order of high surveillance, tracking and tracing for all human beings on the basis that they're trying to keep us safe, but really what they're trying to do is keep us monitored. And that's not something that I particularly want. Again, what else have I got here? There is, more evidence to back everything that I've just said. So there was another article in the Financial Times about a World Economic Forum-backed Common Pass project aims to create the first globally recognised proof that a passenger has tested negative for the virus before a flight, using a digital certificate downloaded to a mobile phone. This is what I was saying to you is, okay, digital certificate downloaded to a mobile phone, and we're one step away from the Moderna vaccine, which is one that is said to put in the digital profiling through our skin, through what is called luciferase light. So these are particles that go in. Again, I'll put an article in there for you about this. But essentially, this is not stuff that I want. Okay, I want to have a choice, and I do not want my freedoms curbed as a result of it. And I also would like people to be better informed about what they're taking, why they're taking it, what the risk factors are, and what alternatives there are, because that isn't what we're being told. We're being told there is no alternative that's credible because it hasn't been tested by, World Health Organization or FDA or whatever. And yet, who's funding the testing and who is going to win from it? Because the philanthropists that are well-meaning, doing things in the world today are also making a lot of money from what they do. So they might be giving some away, but they're also making a lot more back. And there is this relationship, which I'm going to put a video in for you to check out, around, not just the fact that there are trusts, how can I put this? Say there is a foundation, that foundation will have a non-government organization, it will also have testing facilities, and all of them are linked to each other, and it's the same pockets that are getting lined with the benefits of that and the research. So it's a bit of a closed circle, you could say. So consider how many politicians have links with the banking system. I want you to really think about that, because I'm looking into all of them at the moment, and it's like, wow, your dad did what, and your dad did what, and you did what before you were Prime Minister or MP or what? Interesting. Family history, manufactured crisis, the mechanism vehicle to transition from a current system control to a new and improved digitalized system of control. I'm quoting someone else here. A deciding point in history that will determine humanity's future. So this was around the testing that we're talking about. Okay. So ultimately, if you actually look at the New World Order stuff and you delve into any kind of conspiracy stuff, you'll see that the potential planned agenda around this that is being talked about is that we're all scared into submission and surveillance. And as a result of that, we're grateful for the fact that Big Brother's going to be keeping an eye on us. We've been prepared for it for years. Well, we've been watching people live their lives and getting excited about everything that they do. But now we're going to be the ones who are being watched. And it's very Orwellian. It's very 1984. It's very all of that. But we're all just getting on with our lives because we're so busy, and we're not seeing that it's happening right in front of us if we don't actually object to it. So I'm going to put the link to that Crimes Against Humanity video in here. And I'm also going to put a couple of links about that lovely philanthropist Gates and his lovely wife. And I'm just going to say, in my opinion, and this is my opinion, these Messiah complex people are not messiahs. They're very naughty boys. Right, and they've got a lot of birth trauma and pregnancy trauma that they haven't dealt with, so they need to dominate and control, and it's time now for that to stop. And I'm sorry if that makes me sound incredible at this point, but I'm hoping you'll have a little laugh, because we have got to have a sense of humour. It's grave what is going on the one hand, but also really inspiring on the other. And if you take this idea of the apocalypse being the great reveal, it is a bit of a shitstorm at the moment. But if we're willing to let our hearts guide us and say, all right, I want the best for me, my children, my parents, my grandparents, my partner, what's the best? I can't just believe you, because I know you've lied to me a lot, whether it's the media, whether it's the government. Like, why do we suddenly believe our governments when we know we're lied to every election? Like, it's just like, hello. Oh, suddenly we're all so scared that we want someone else to tell us what to do. And this is the point, is I want to trust my government. I want to trust the scientists that inform my government. I want to trust the doctors that I go to. But too often I've had conversations that personally have left me feeling that I know more about the subject that I'm talking to the person that's supposed to be advising me about, and all they can do is quote their textbook training to me, and that is not good enough. And yes, I am sounding angry. Okay, let's finish this. I did mention a little bit about the flu vaccine. Again, like, you know, God help me, like, if this was the only answer, and it is the answer to everything, fine, but I don't see it. I see it causing more problems, more allergies, more intolerances, all sorts of things that if someone gets on here and says to me, there's no big trials that have been done to prove this, I'll just say to you, well, who's going to benefit from those big trials? Small trials are done, but they're poo-pooed all over the place because the big companies that stand to profit do not get to profit if what they're putting forward gets proved to not be as effective as something else, or actually to have damaging consequences that one would look for another solution. And, you know, we are in that place where the abuse of power comes as no surprise, and power corrupts, absolute power corrupts, absolutely. So transparency, accountability is essential, and we are not getting that. We're just being told we must conform, we must obey, otherwise there are going to be consequences, and those consequences will include curtailing our civil liberties and also potentially fines and potentially getting arrested. Now that's frigging massive for something that isn't coming and destroying the whole planet in the figures that they said to us that it was going to be. And, you know, this was down to projecting through models, digital models that don't work. And again, we're getting a guy, like, again, I don't want to mention the name, to advise us in terms of best protocol for fighting a virus that couldn't even keep it out of his technology. So I'm just a bit like dubious on that one as well. And yeah, just to sort of finish this off, because I think vaccines needs to be a different conversation. I'd far rather get the doctors that speak about them to speak up rather than me. What's the solution? So Bruce Lipton talks about imaginal cells, and in his video about imaginal cells, he talks about the fact that when men come together in Parliament to try and come to a solution over something that's a problem, they just argue amongst each other. But when they brought the women in, I think this was an example in India, what women will do is they'll seek to find where we have common ground, and we'll build from there. So the feminine rising is about being able to take those unmet needs of the wounded masculine to say, right, we know you need to feel powerful in order to be safe, to feel safe. We're going to put that to the side. We're going to start looking at what's for the best for everybody, okay? Everybody. What's best for me, what's best for you, what's best for everybody, because it might be different. What's best for me might be different to what's best for you. And we need to be open to that. We need to have a discussion about it rather than trying to find something that works for everybody. We've got to find selective care. Also, I'm going to invite you to consider that what is it you actually want from your health service? Would you like to move into an integrated, informative type of health service where we have holistic therapies, we have Ayurveda, Chinese medicine, we have homeopathy, we have herbalism, we have different ways of treating our bodies and our health so that we can move into optimal health rather than be reliant on a synthetic basis of health that does actually have a lot of consequences. Now, don't get me wrong. My arm's hanging off, I'm going to go to A&E. If I need emergency treatment, I'll take the emergency treatment given to me. But then it's the follow-on care that's so important, and the preventative care that's so important. And I don't believe our current system, this is my opinion, actually does preventative very well, and it doesn't do post-care very well either. And that's definitely evident in the fertility, pregnancy and birth world and baby world. So that's where my area of expertise is, and that's where I'll stay. I want us to move away in our heads from right and wrong, and actually a bit like what was said by my beautiful, beautiful colleague and inspiration. It's about the fact that there are multiple truths. What suits me, what suits my life, what's the best thing for my family might be different to your family. And so instead of moving into the whole argument of wrong, right, we move into and this and more. So either or moves to and this and more. And we start to look at other ways that we can do things. What sort of world do we want our children to live in? We want to all feel safe, right? But does that mean cameras everywhere? Does that mean our phones being tracked? Does that mean scanning QR codes everywhere we go? Is that really what you want? Is that Is that what you want your children to have? Do you want them to be scared of strangers in the sense that they might all have bugs that are going to kill us all? Do you want, you know, everyone to think it's normal to wear a mask? All of this, like, it has to be questioned, because there's a lot of research to say that the mask wearing isn't the answer. And yes, I know there's articles about the Spanish flu and the fact that they wore masks then. So, you know, that obviously worked then. Just because they wore them doesn't mean it worked. And, you know, if you speak to surgeons, you speak to people who wear medical masks, they'll tell you they're not used for the purposes that we're using them today. What world do you want to live in? What do you want from the world around you? Get involved with local groups. So I'd highly recommend getting involved with Save Our Rights UK. I'm obviously English, but there'll be other groups that you can join in your country, your area. Start to get involved, start to examine information from different sources, start to sign petitions, lobby your MPs, speak up, have conversations with people that are difficult to have, share your resources and what you've learned. That way we all save a lot of time, right? Don't try to convince anyone of anything. So many of us are terrified about what's happening. I know there are people that I know that are in the holistic world that are terrified about what's happening, and it's consuming them. And this is what I mean is fear breeds fear. Whatever you're focusing on grows. So whether you're fearful of the virus and therefore wanting to protect everyone through the current mainstream measures, or you're fearful of the measures that are being put in place and not the virus, either way, fear is motivating your actions and your decision making, and that's not going to be the highest, most evolved place to make decisions from. So all of us are going to be healing our birth trauma through this if we are willing to learn from all of the research that's taken place in the last 40, 50 years, and actually to evolve our consciousness beyond fight or flight into thriving, into rest, repair, feed and breed, which is the parasympathetic nervous system response that we activate when we feel safe in the world. So we have to start to feel safe inside of us, and then we can start to feel safe in the world. And it has a direct effect on your immune system. Yeah, your immune system is boosted by feeling good. It is weakened by feeling rubbish. So again, where is the responsibility in what's going on in our news? It's not responsible, in my opinion, knowing what I know about this, to scare everybody into submission. Although it is a way to control a lot of people. Just saying. So patriarchal systems of control are dying. Like the virus, it's desperate to survive. You suppress it and it finds another way to express itself. So I believe the systems that are trying desperately hard to take control at this point and to actually keep control are not going to be able to. It's already a lost cause, but we have to all stand up and replace it now. There's a structure around the old structure that's crumbling, and we need to activate this structure. The relationship between banking, technology, politics and the pharmaceutical industries. Please look at that. You can't look at things in isolation. You've got to look at them together and say, what is this leading to? What would be the benefits of this? Who's going to benefit from it and why? And I know you're probably not a multi-billionaire actually watching this. So I don't, how to have the mindset of someone who's already got so much money and power and has other agendas which we don't even know about. If it's going and saving the whole planet and saving the world, I've got to ask the question why both Africa and India don't have lots of nice things to say about certain philanthropists. And beyond this, I want to invite you to start to make some decisions and to consider, are the people making the decisions for us in their right minds? As I said to you, they're all descendants of World War and also descendants of those who protagonized the slave trade. White supremacism is a conversation we have to have. We have to understand the backgrounds of the people that are currently very powerful. We have to look at the link between unprocessed trauma and psychopathy and sociopathy and the way that things get played out. We are fourth, fifth generation since World War I, if I've got myself right, third, fourth, fifth, sixth. Are these men calling the shots capable of making decisions not based on an inflated sense of danger? Okay, because they're already triggered into that, because that's what made them want to have the power in the first place that they have. And this is a result of their time in the womb. There is more to that. There is science around that. I'm just talking in a very general way. How do we get over it? Well, we need to create safety first and foremost. We need to feel safe, and we really need to take that back to pregnancy, fertility, pregnancy, and the first 7 years of life. The government knows this, by the way. There's the 1001 Days manifesto, which is a cross-party manifesto. So I'm going to leave this here. I'm just going to basically put all of the resources around what I've talked about in the text box so you can have a look at them. Please, if there's one to check out for absolute sure and you haven't got the time to do anything else, it's going to be this guy's one. Where am I? Reiner Fuellmich's one, which if you can't find on YouTube, you'll be able to find on BitChute. I would also encourage you to research Gates on BitChute, the story of Bill Gates. Just look it up and make your own informed decisions from that and how it relates to how he is portrayed in the media and how he portrays himself. What else am I going to invite you to do? To check out the one about the PCR testing, which is another video. And like I said, you can do these things whilst you're doing other things, but rather than dig your head in the sand and pretend none of this exists because it's too uncomfortable and you don't really want to deal with it, do something, find out, okay? And be prepared to stand up and be counted, because you're doing this for the future generations. We are the ones that are deciding now what is going to take place in the future. And so we can't afford to ignore the issues at hand. We can't afford to get this wrong. We want to bring all truth to light. And if that means that certain people are going to have an uncomfortable experience because what they've been putting forward is not the truth, then this needs to be revealed. And some of the biggest heads of power at the moment, really, yeah, I have to question them. You know, as far as we come to my own Prime Minister, this UK, my own personal opinion is, mate, I'm sorry, but I'm just not buying what you're saying. And obviously you are, you know, you're doing your best for the country. You're obviously getting advice from people, but to ignore 7,000 doctors to me is a bit crazy, scientific, you know, science and doctors. And also to, you know, I can't imagine that you've got the time yourself to research things, and you obviously have some strong opinions about things without potentially knowing things to the depth that I'm talking about. So I'd invite you to open your mind and your heart. And I don't particularly think it's a good idea to encourage anybody to suppress a virus, because you can't really do that. You can't suppress anything without it coming up later. But that says a lot about how you deal with things. And I think it says a lot about how people who are uncomfortable with the uncomfortable deal with things. And it's time that we start getting comfortable with the uncomfortable, because history is full of uncomfortable truths. But if we can actually bring them to light, witness them, bring forgiveness and compassion, then we can make a very different choice for our future. And that's why I'm making this video. And I'm really appealing to the mums, to the dads, to those who are like, oh, don't know what to do with this, to just check out the links I've sent. Just follow it, put it together. And that statement, follow the money, is well worth taking note of. Right, I'm going now. Sending you lots of love. Thank you so much, all of you. Yeah, I hear you, Jimmy. I'm not going to say too much on that. Fact checkers, who fact checks the fact checkers? You're absolutely right. There's a lot of questioning around the fact checkers. I've done a bit of checking of fact checking sites and who's behind them, and they're all mainstream journalists, or linked to politics, or linked to organizations that, if you dig a little bit deeper, there seems to be an agenda. Thank you for liking. Thank you for subscribing. Is there any more comments here? Yeah, give tyranny an inch. Well, we've been complacent for a long time, where it's been very difficult to even be able to understand. Like, it's really hard when you look into something and you realize things are not the way you've been told they are. I get it. Like, I started to do this very young in my life at uni, and it's not easy, but at the same time, it's very liberating. So that's what I was going to finish with. It's normal to feel angry and to disbelieve things that don't conform to your current mindset. That's the normal part of shifting and expanding your view. It's happened in science, in medical. Like, there's always resistance to the new. It has to prove itself, right? And there'll always be those who don't want the new. They want to keep things as they are because that's what they know. And that's the uncomfortable comfort zone. We're evolving all of the time. We're either evolving towards a harmonization of our body, mind, heart, and soul, or to further separate ourselves so we are more like automatrons. And if we're going to start merging with AI, we're going to start, you know, having digital profiles, and we're going to start to basically be more like technology than human, then we are starting to affect our consciousness in a way that I would say is not bridging soul and humanity. And that's not the world that I want to live in. So I love you lots. Thank you so much. If you enjoyed this video, please share it. If you've got anything you'd like me to comment on in the future, then let me know. I'd love the idea of keeping these shorter, but it seems I'm not very capable of doing that. So I hope it's just useful to you, and I send it from my heart to you to start a conversation that hopefully will allow all of our hearts to open up and to be willing to say, not in my name. No, this is a boundary. I am not accepting this. This is a violation of civil liberties, human rights, and actually it's a disproportionate response to the situation. Okay, and that is the argument that people are speaking up about now that is being suppressed, but it is making it into the mainstream news. So just be open to shifting your mindset. As we change our view of the world around us changes. Again, I've expressed my personal opinions and I've related it to articles and videos that I will put in the text box for you to look at yourself. Please don't think that I'm telling you what to do or what to think. I'm inviting the idea that there are multiple truths and we need to discuss those, and we need to come up with a solution that is going to support everybody to thrive rather than just to survive. Lots of love. Thank you. Take care.